everyone. My name is Emily McKeon. I'm a senior consultant in Trinity's Oakland office. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start out with going over the agenda for today's webinar, just highlight what we're going to be talking about over the next 90 minutes or so. We'll start out with the objectives of today's webinar and a brief introduction to Trinity for those of you who have not worked with us before. Then we'll go briefly over what is an environmental management system and what are the benefits of having such a system. Then we'll touch on the changes to the ISO 14001 standard that were finalized last year from the previous version that was finalized in 2004. Then we'll take a deeper dive into some of the more key themes of the new standard that are really influenced how organizations will develop their EMSs or update their EMSs according to the ISO standard. And this includes context of the organization, internal and external EMS stakeholders, aspects and impacts, risk evaluation, life cycle perspective, and sustainability and social responsibility. And lastly, we'll close out with a summary of how this all ties together to develop an EMS that will assist your organization in accomplishing its strategic objectives. We briefly outline the objectives of today's webinar. We'll touch on Trinity's experience with environmental management systems, developing them, auditing them, etc. What benefits an EMS can provide. If your organization does not have one already, why should you have one? Or if you have one, why should you update it to the updated standard? Review the changes with the updated standard that was finalized last year. It was a pretty significant overhaul from the 2004 standard, so there's lots to know. How to approach some of the key themes in the new standard in your environmental management system, and overall, as I stated previously, how to tie this all together to assist your company with its strategic objectives. A brief intro on Trinity Consultants. We were founded in 1974 with one office in Dallas, Texas. And at that time, we predominantly focused on air quality. That was our specialty for compliance and permitting purposes. Now in 2016, we have over 600 employees and offices in the US, Canada, China, United Kingdom, and Middle East. So we have grown geographically pretty significantly. And not only that, our business offerings have expanded significantly as well. While we were once an air quality specialized firm, and we still continue to do that work to this day, we have expanded into other areas such as ambient air monitoring, water quality permitting, information management systems, etc. We are also a ISO 9001 certified company. And essentially, this is a quality management system certification, and we are certified in our headquarter office in Dallas, but certifiable in our other offices across the world. And this is just an overview of where all of our offices are located. You can see we have several offices throughout the United States, as well as in China, the Middle East, and United Kingdom. Most recently, we acquired a company in Iowa, and so now have a West Des Moines office. And really the most crucial part of this, having offices in all these different locations, is that Trinity is well served to assist our clients on local issues and local industries. We are very familiar with the regulatory climate of our local offices, and so that way we can really work with clients to understand their particular industry and make sure that communications with regulators and other stakeholders is effective and in the best interest of the clients that we're serving. And here's just an overview of the many services that we offer. Like I said, while we were once just an air quality specialized firm, now reach out into several different disciplines in terms of environmental consulting. You'll see on there EMS and ISO 14001 is a key area that we have significantly grown in since our founding in 1974. Life cycle assessments, which we'll talk about more later. And like I said, so the water side of things and ambient air monitoring, air quality, etc. So this list of the multimedia environmental services that we offer has grown significantly in the last 40 years. What makes Trinity different? Trinity is a very, like I said, with our ISO 9001 certified headquarter office, very committed to quality and ensuring that the value of our services is reflected in the quality of the products that we deliver. And we utilize powerful project management tools such as a knowledge management system. And essentially such a system allows us to have a multitude of information and experts at our fingertips. So where your primary contact for a certain project or a certain facility may not have the exact answer to the question you have, there are resources within Trinity to immediately reach out to an expert in-house that can provide assistance on whatever the issue is. So that's a very powerful project management tool that has been in the works for Trinity in the last 5 years or so. And also the focus on communication with clients. We ensure that we have frequent and effective communication not only with clients during projects but also within project teams to make sure that expectations and goals are being met and communicated to the client. So now we'll start in with an introduction to environmental management systems. The environmental management system is essentially a set of processes and practices that are used to manage risks and opportunities related to environmental issues of an organization. And usually such a system is put in place by following a specific framework or model. And today we'll mostly focus on the ISO 14001 model, as that is the most common for an environmental management system. And the goal of such a system is to integrate awareness of environmental issues throughout an entire company. I think typically with environmental issues, sometimes it can get concentrated just at the environmental level of an organization. And really, the goal and the purpose of an environmental management system is to permeate those environmental issues to the rest of the organization, based on the understanding that such issues affect more than just compliance and environmental staff. So it's crucial that awareness is present in all staff of a certain organization. Awareness of environmental issues, awareness that a management system is in place, and how their work can affect the results of that management system. So essentially the success of an EMS is largely driven by awareness from all employees. The EMS is put into action by more than just environmental staff. And it's really crucial to understand that the ISO 14001 standard, while giving requirements for what you should include in your management system, is extremely vague on how you should implement those requirements within your organization. And this is done on purpose because the point of the standard is to be able to be applied to any organization, large or small, regardless of whatever industry or the culture of that company. And really the management system should be tailored to whatever the intended outcomes are of that organization. So possibly one organization may have an emphasis on regulatory compliance, while another is more interested in having a system that facilitates communication of environmental performance to employees and other stakeholders. And depending on what the intended outcomes are of that system, that'll drive exactly what form the system takes. So it's really important to keep in mind that the standard and management systems are definitely not cookie cutter and are really molded around whatever the specific organization is. So to go a little bit further into what the purpose of an environmental management system is, like we said, it's really looking at those environmental issues and putting into place a system where you're identifying, managing, monitoring, and controlling whatever environmental risks or issues that you were looking at. And so this is a cycle that we'll look at a little bit more in detail in a few minutes, but the overall purpose of such a system is to put in place a methodology for going through this cycle of identification, mitigating, monitoring, and controlling for this continual improvement of environmental performance. And ultimately, the end goal is to increase your environmental performance, whether that be regulatory compliance related or in terms of the vision of, let's say, a customer of your environmental performance, and to minimize risks of your organization. And like we saw in the webinar agenda slide, we'll be going into risk evaluation and a process for that in this webinar as well. And a key theme that is present in the ISO 14001 standards, and is really necessary regardless of whether you follow this ISO 14001 standard or not, is that continual improvement is key. And the system is put into place so that whenever issues are found, they're corrected, and then some sort of change is made in order to prevent such a similar issue from occurring. And so in that way, you're continually improving not only your management system and how effectively it's working, but also the environmental performance of your organization. Well, it seems obvious that one of the key benefits of an environmental management system would be regulatory compliance. There are a multitude of other benefits that can be had from a robust environmental management system. For example, you could have promoting innovation. So if you go above and beyond your compliance obligations and put into place, for example, some sort of sustainability initiative, that would be a really good example of promoting some sort of innovation within your organization. Of course, reducing risks and liabilities and maintaining compliance. Alignment to your company's key performance indicators. Like I said earlier, while environmental management systems are clearly tailored to the environmental issues of an organization, the environmental performance really does affect the key performance indicators and business objectives as well. So that's important to keep in mind. Improve change management execution, another item that we will touch upon further, but this is crucial. Essentially instituting a program such that any changes that are made in the organization are fully assessed to determine their environmental implications. Increase employee motivation and engagement. Like I said earlier, the awareness of the environmental management system and the participation from employees outside of just the environmental department is crucial and ultimately lends itself to a more successful EMS, which leads to more benefits from your EMS. So always a good question is, why should you have an EMS in place? And we've kind of touched on some of the benefits already, but at this point in time, EMSs are largely recognized and recommended by several different organizations and groups such as EPA, World Bank, American Chemistry Council. The American Chemistry Council acknowledging the effectiveness of ISO 14001 and environmental management systems created a similar type program called the Responsible Care 14001 program, and which is geared towards chemical manufacturing companies specifically, and really puts an emphasis on health, safety, security, and environment. And when having an EMS in place, a robust EMS, there's a great likelihood of staying ahead of regulations and coming out in front of any risks or issues that may plague your organization, which of course lends well in terms of interactions with regulating bodies such as EPA, states, and local governments. And ultimately, an EMS is a systematic and cost-effective method for assessing and addressing environmental issues. And once it's put into place and has been implemented and absorbed by the organization, there are tangible cost savings of having a robust EMS. We've kind of talked generally about environmental management systems, and now we'll go a little bit more into depth into the ISO 14001 standards specifically. Like I said earlier, the last version of the ISO 14001 standard was from 2004, and this past September 2015, the standard was completely overhauled and several changes were made. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on what those changes look like. This table basically presents what the structure of the new standard is versus the old standard. And you'll see that the key elements line up in some areas from the new standard and not so much on other areas, because there were additional sections added onto the standard with the 2015 revision, and some sections were completely changed. So you'll see that this is helpful and kind of as a crosswalk for determining how the requirements and elements line up according to the old standard. And it's kind of important to know that while ISO 14001 presents the most common model for environmental management systems for organizations, that doesn't necessarily mean that certification to the ISO 14001 standard is required. It really depends on what the priorities of the organization, whether it's consideration of cost or consideration of customer requirements. There certainly is opportunity for having a robust EMS implemented in your organization that is not necessarily formally certified to the ISO 14001 standard, because there is cost associated with that. There are, some additional logistics. So depending on really what your motivation is for the environmental management system and what you hope to come out of it, for example, satisfying a customer's requirement, then certification may or may not be what's best for your particular organization. But following the ISO 14001 framework really lends well still to developing and implementing a robust EMS. For example, I have worked with a client before that did not feel extremely comfortable with the life cycle perspective element of the new standard, which we will get into in a little bit more detail here shortly, and didn't feel like it was a good fit for the company currently and not necessarily a good use of resources and focus at that time. So they are still developing their ISO 14001 EMS, but they have chose not to go through certification because they don't feel like at this point in time that they could truly address that element. So there is flexibility in that regard. This slide just kind of shows what the overall organization of the ISO 14001 system looks like and puts that previous table that we looked at kind of into this cyclical representation. And that's really where kind of what it comes down to for the ISO 14001 standard is the plan, do, check, act cycle. And essentially the goal is to achieve continual improvement as you continue to go through this cycle for your environmental issues. And essentially the cycle starts out with establishing an environmental policy for your organization and the scope of your EMS. And this allows you to then set objectives and targets for your environmental management system, as well as in evaluating your policy, as well as any compliance obligations or any of the requirements that your organization subscribes to. Then once you've determined what these objectives look like, then you can start to kind of form your EMS in a way that will facilitate achieving those objectives. And like I said earlier, since every single environmental management system will have likely a different intended outcome, this implementation is really customizable to your particular organization. And usually a management system might take the form of a set of procedures and tools, and that really all just gets shaped by whatever the goals of the management system are. And once the system has been put into place, the objectives have been set, then there comes a process of evaluating your performance of your management system as well as of your environmental performance. So for example, evaluating compliance with a specific requirement, or evaluating on the non-regulatory side how well your management system responded to some nonconformity. And when this is reviewed by upper management, processes are put into place in order to address those nonconformities, address those issues, and drive towards continual improvement, and then the cycle restarts. So ultimately, the management system is fluid. It's a live system, so it's always being updated depending on the operations and of the events of the organization. But the overall cycle of the system follows this plan, do, check, act structure. And we'll get into a few of the specific elements that are listed here as they are key themes represented in the new ISO 14001 standard. Okay, so to get into those revisions that we've been talking about, kind of the main, most noticeable change was an update to the structure of the standard. And if your company is ISO 9001 standard potentially or certified, then you'll also see this change in structure to that standard as well. So the governing body behind these standards is instituting a new structure to all of its quality or all of its management system related standards. So you'll see that these will be kind of the high level structure for any of those management system standards. And like we saw previously with the layout of how the standard flows, these are the various titles of the elements of the standard. So regardless of whether you're looking at a quality management system or an environmental management system standard, they will have these high-level elements to the system standard. So this was the first most noticeable change in the new standard for ISO 14001. And then next comes a little bit more specifically to environmental, just some of the themes and the emphasis that was placed on by the committee that was in charge of the revisions to the standard. So especially relevant for our purposes for today, one of the key themes is increased prominence of environmental issues in strategic planning processes. So essentially ensuring that environmental issues are incorporated into business planning and business strategy, and that those are considered when developing those plans and strategies. Greater input from leadership, essentially having buy-in from top management and having accountability for the system's successes and failures taken all the way to the top. And this is helpful so that really that someone feels ownership over the management system and the vitality of the management system. A strong commitment to environmental performance. In the past standard, there were requirements for commitment to continual improvement of your management system. There's that element as well as continual improvement of environmental performance. And this really emphasizes the sustainability theme of this new standard, which we'll talk about in further slides as well. And then addressing change management and climate change, again with sustainability. Focus on life cycle thinking, that this is probably one of the more, probably not contentious, but difficult elements, I think, for organizations that already have an EMS or that are developing EMSs to address, essentially instituting this life cycle thinking when looking at the aspects and environmental issues of your facility or of your organization. And again, we will go into that in further detail as well. And then focusing communications on stakeholders and addressing stakeholder concerns. And we will also go into this in detail in a few slides. So these are kind of the main themes that we're seeing with this new standard, emphasis on these items. Like I said, with the emphasis on sustainability, this is the mission statement from the committee that was in charge of revising the ISO 14001 standard. You'll see the common theme on their mission statement throughout this process, sustainability, highlighted in several places. So this is really more in line with in the past 15, 20 years as sustainability has become more prominent in organizations and become more of a priority. This standard is reflecting that as well, and also reflecting this requirement to have continual improvement to environmental performance. So essentially, with this system, it's no longer enough to just attain your compliance with your regulatory obligations. The goal and the mission behind the standard at this point is to go above that and institute various sustainability initiatives as it works for your organization. So this is a pretty prevalent new theme with this standard. And this table just summarizes what we talked about a few slides ago, basically the thematic changes that we're seeing with this new standard. This just lists out a little bit more detail on each of those various themes, like we said, with protecting the environment, climate change mitigation, environmental performance, making sure that that is communicated as necessary to stakeholders, examining life cycle impacts of your products and services, and identifying stakeholders' needs and expectations, which we'll get into here in a second. And these themes weren't necessarily absent in the 2004 standard, but they have been emphasized to a higher degree in the 2015 standard. So you may have some elements of these themes already present in your management system if you have an existing system, but they are much more prevalent now in the 2015 standard than they were previously. Okay, now we're going to start into our specific discussion on the key themes of the new ISO 14001 standard and really what that means for a company that has an existing system or is in the process of developing a system, what the purpose is of these themes, how do you implement them and incorporate them into your system. So first we have context of the organization, and this is the standard kind of opens up with this section and this. Like I said earlier, many of these themes were present in the previous standard, but are now more emphasized in the 2015 standard. The context of the organization is no exception. So this was discussed somewhat briefly in the appendix of the previous standard, but now has its own full-blown section in the 2015 standard. And really, I look at this section as just the starting point and a springboard for developing your EMS. And the 4 steps of doing so includes getting an understanding of the key issues that affect your facility, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. So this might include internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, defining the EMS scope, and integrating the EMS into various business functions. And so really the goal here is to fully understand all issues and parties that are relevant to an organization's strategic direction and intended outcomes. So really, when evaluating the needs and expectations of interested parties, what the scope of your EMS is going to be, this all ties back to what the overall intended outcomes are of your management system. And like we said earlier, the standard is very vague in terms of what the EMS scope can look like. So that's really up to the judgment of the organization to determine what in its operations does it have influence over and would like to tie into this management system. And then once that has been determined, what are the various stakeholders involved in that scope? What are the issues that either the organization can affect due to its environmental performance or can be affected by because of its environmental performance? So once these 4 steps are followed and determined, then it sets kind of the framework for the environmental management system where objectives can then be determined, aspects can be evaluated of your operations, and then the system can be put into place. So this just goes a little bit more over the various language that's in place in the standard. So like I said, evaluating external and internal context. So essentially, where does your organization fit in terms of external forces, external factors that may influence your organization, and then also internally, what is the climate of your internal operations? What is the setup of your organization? How are environmental risks handled? So once this is evaluated and an organization may determine its place both externally and internally, then it allows for the organization to more successfully address the true environmental risks and issues that affect that organization. So this first step is necessary in determining really what should be captured by your environmental management system. And so you want to consider environmental parameters, exactly what environmental issues does your organization face, internal conditions, like I said, your internal company culture, external issues, so customers, suppliers, regulators, things like that. And then once that has been established, you can assess the needs and expectations of interested parties. So the goal of your management system, for example, regulatory compliance. So that's, a need and an expectation of a regulatory body. But you can obviously go deeper than that in determining the various groups, both internally and externally, that your organization interacts with. What do they need and expect from you in terms of environmental performance? And also determining what interests they have in your environmental performance and how that interest might affect your organization. And then, of course, evaluating which of those needs and expectations correspond to compliance obligations. So the benefits of going through this exercise and really understanding the organizational context of your organization. This will assist with identifying the scope of the EMS to ensure that you draw the boundaries of your EMS in a way that you give yourself a good chance to be successful with the intended outcomes of the EMS. Frame EMS objectives. So like I said, that's kind of the next step after establishing this context is what do we want to target? What do we need to make sure that we are setting objectives around? And when you understand the organizational context of your organization to that degree, setting those EMS objectives and setting objectives that have a tangible impact and significant success of achieving becomes a lot easier. And then you can more easily identify and manage risks and strategies that can affect achieving your objectives. So again, once understanding how you fit in both on an external and internal basis, you can more easily understand what the various environmental risks are that your organization might face. And common issues for consideration when determining what issues should be the focus of your EMS. We have listed here air quality management, deforestation, waste minimization, etc. So when determining what elements should be the subject of your key objectives, what should this EMS really focus on, these are some issues that you might want to consider. And then ask yourself the questions, what drivers are these impacted by? Are they key drivers such as regulatory compliance? Are these a problem area for our organization? Usually there's one element or environmental multimedia that may present more issues than others, or maybe a more significant issue to a regulator or to a customer, so keeping that in mind. Is there any opportunity for potential benefit for the organization to address this one particular issue? And along with that, competitive advantage potentially if, let's say, for waste minimization, you have a waste diversion goal that's put into place that to reduce waste to landfill by 50% by the year 2020, maybe a specific customer may be interested in such a goal, and that'll provide some sort of leverage or competitive advantage over some other organization. And then, of course, how material is this issue to stakeholders, whether that be internal or external? So in order to identify the stakeholder materiality of a various issue, you may want to consider implementing some sort of scoring system to really organize these various issues according to their significance. And such a scoring system may include, how aware is this stakeholder of whatever issue, how high is their concern level with a particular issue. And this is an example of an exercise that an organization might go through to, like I said, act as the springboard for determining what all should be encapsulated by the EMS, what are the particular issues that need to be addressed by the EMS. And so this may be one way that you could go about evaluating this, as it seems like a pretty lofty exercise to really just address through some sort of discussion. So we find that some sort of like scoring mechanism is really helpful in organizing these issues and prioritizing them. So like we said, with air quality, for example, is that impacted by some kind of driver? So that might be regulatory. So if you have an organization with facilities where air quality presents a really significant risk, or maybe there have been issues in the past, then you would score based on these various categories accordingly. And ultimately, going through such an exercise will allow you to identify those issues that you can address, in order to get some sort of potential benefit, that you can address to improve regulatory compliance and thus relationship with that stakeholder. So going through a similar exercise, or however makes sense for that particular organization, will make it more clear really what the targets and focus of the environmental management system will be. And that was really a key improvement in the ISO 14001 updated standard. Previously, there was an emphasis on following your environmental policy, which would potentially make similar commitments to air quality improvement, et cetera. But this context of the organization and going through this exercise allows the organization to really key in on risks and issues that are the most relevant for that facility, and which ultimately just makes the management system overall more effective and at managing risks and improving environmental performance. This is where, if you have an EMS already in place, that maybe to revisit that environmental management system, to go through some sort of exercise like this and really see if the management system is encapturing what you intended for it to and the major issues that are relevant for your organization. And like we said, the management system is fluid, it's always changing, and that continual improvement piece comes into play here. So next we're going to touch on internal and external EMS stakeholders, which we've discussed a little bit already. And here the key goal on the standard, or coming from the standard, is really to improve communication and address stakeholder concerns, whatever they may be. So obviously or not so obviously, the stakeholders that may be of interest to your particular organization could include employees, your community, regulators, customers, etc. Like we said, the driver for your management system may be a customer requirement. They may require that you have an ISO 14001 certified standard in place in order to receive their business. There may be some unrest among employees of your organization due to potential disorganization on environmental issues or perceived disorganization, so assessing their needs and expectations is also critical, and really what would ultimately make the compliance and environmental issues of that organization run more smoothly. Investors, of course, another key similar to customers. So assessing and determining which stakeholders may have a factor or may have a presence with your organization is critical and goes hand in hand in that context of the organization exercise that we were just talking about. And there are a series of questions that you may pose to your team, your EMS implementation team that is developing the management system, of exactly determining what is needed from a stakeholder or what the stakeholder needs from you, and then assessing how that management system will address whatever stakeholder concerns or requirements might need to be in place. So questions that you may ask would be, what is the stakeholder's impact on our business? Do they have a significant impact? Could their perceived impression of our environmental performance have a significant impact on our bottom line potentially. That may be something we want to consider. What issues are important to those stakeholders? So, and depending on how important and influential that stakeholder is, you know, you may place more importance on the issues that they find important. What type of interaction is desired by the stakeholder? What kind of relationship has been had in the past? Have interactions in the past been successful? Again, what are the benefits and costs of the stakeholder relationship to our company? Of course, satisfying stakeholder concerns is critical, but also what are the benefits of satisfying those concerns and those requirements? And then what can be done to optimize the stakeholder relationship? And what opportunities are there or risks potentially with engaging in a relationship with a stakeholder? So all of these questions need to be assessed to determine exactly how an organization might want to go about communicating and addressing the concerns with a stakeholder, and what stakeholders warrant what kind of level of communication. It may vary depending on the stakeholder. And again, a potential methodology for going about this exercise and determining what stakeholders need to be engaged and how do we go about engaging them, how frequently should we engage with them on environmental issues. Of course, step one, identifying those key stakeholders. So we had a list previously of some that may be considered, but really depending on the organization, there may be more or less. Characterizing the stakeholders. What influence do they have on your organization? How dependent are they on you or you on them? And how ready are they to engage? Depending on the stakeholder, maybe that kind of interaction is not desired. And then prioritizing the stakeholder list to determine what, similar to with the context, determining what issues we should address and what should be the emphasis of our management system, which stakeholders should be the emphasis, what stakeholders' concerns should we prioritize above others or engage with more frequently. And then assigning a classification for each of those stakeholders, determining should we keep them satisfied, just kind of throw them a bone every now and then, but not concerned too much with engaging with them, keeping them informed, and again, depending on an organization's communication strategies that may take different forms, keeping informed with more significant conversation or managing closely and putting that really at the top of the priority list in terms of stakeholder engagement. And to break down those various criteria that you may assess stakeholder engagement on a little bit more in more detailed fashion, influence criteria. Do they issue licenses for your organization to operate? So potentially some sort of regulatory body. Can their perceived impression of your environmental performance inspire them to act in such a way that could impact your company reputation? Can they contribute to the innovation ability of your company? Do they affect your access to some sort of resources or capital that are crucial for your organization's operations? So these are some criteria that may want to be addressed in determining how influential a stakeholder may be on you or you on them in regards to environmental issues. And then dependency, some sort of direct financial connection, so maybe a supplier or customer or an investor, connection for essential services, again, could be a supplier potentially, at risk from product and or operations. So really this is how dependent is your organization on that stakeholder, and how could that dependency be affected based on some sort of environmental issues or risk or performance. Engagement readiness, so this will vary depending on potentially past interactions with that stakeholder or just the overall attitude of that stakeholder. So maybe you've had adversarial interactions with that stakeholder in the past, or competitive, potentially, cooperative. So this is crucial to evaluate in determining really what's the best plan of attack for engaging with that stakeholder if you choose to do so. And similar to the context of the organization tool that we looked at a few minutes ago, going about some sort of scoring mechanism for characterizing stakeholders can also be helpful. And this is, again, similar to issues of your environmental management system like air quality. This allows you to put in perspective which stakeholders are most critical to your operations, and some sort of scoring criteria could be put into place and then done so according to those criteria that we just discussed with influence, dependency, engagement, readiness. And then once that has been evaluated, then we've determined in this example, investors, that is our highest priority stakeholder that we would like to initiate some sort of engagement with or reassess our current engagement with to make sure that it is meeting the intended outcomes of our management system or of your organization. So this is key in addition to the context of the organization evaluation in evaluating prior to setting your management system into motion to ensure that the management system is targeting the highest priority issues and stakeholders and engaging them appropriately. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who will continue our discussion on detailed ISO 14001 themes with aspects and impacts.
Thank you, Emily. Well, thank you, and I appreciate everyone for attending today. I'm going to continue to highlight the areas, kind of building off what Emily just spoke about, areas that we've received feedback from clients whether they're developing an EMS, they're improving upon their EMS, maybe aligning with the new standard, or they're integrating it into their internal structure to achieve the strategic objectives of that EMS, and basically to work like a thread through the organization rather than being a standalone management system. So we're going to start with aspects and impacts as a basis and kind of take that from the baseline and go forward. Whether you are in industry, whether it's chemical, mining, foods, or communications, whether you're a university or public service, or you just make a product, the important part to take into consideration with your EMS is it's essential that you integrate it into your individual company and maybe even your individual location's business model. That's a key part of integration and essential to an effective implementation plan. So let's get started with aspects and impacts, and then we'll progress on to risk and life cycle assessment, sustainability, and social responsibility. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the background and the foundation of your EMS, kind of, again, to catapult from where Emily had given you that context of the organization and context of your management system. I'm sure you're already aware of the current challenges and risks as well as the opportunities you have within your organization and your business. One of the areas that we at Trinity tried to focus with our clients, and we see in the most successful management system implementation, is when they look at that they take it as a strategic approach and look more holistically across the entire business, taking into consideration all areas. And one of the things with ISO and the new updates, the 2015 updates, they're encouraging that entire life cycle thinking. So what I challenge you if you haven't already, to really take a look across your entire supply chain. Start from everything from concept, if you're developing a new product line with the R&D side of your business, as well as materials and manufacturing. Consider if your distribution of your product, consider whether it's international, whether it's national, whether it's local, and that distribution, as well as disposal and recycling. That does take a life cycle perspective. That does not mean you have to adhere to all life cycle practices, but it does take a comprehensive or holistic look at what the elements of your EMS and enables you to better integrate with the rest of your company's internal systems, whether they be a quality system, maybe there's a number of maintenance management tools that would, the maintenance on control or emissions control equipment, safety systems. Maybe your facility adheres to Six Sigma, right? Consider the marketing as well as I mentioned earlier, external distribution of your materials. So again, look at all aspects of your products, raw materials, waste disposal, and of that product as well. So what should you consider when you're thinking about this entire supply chain? Look at inputs and outputs, obviously. We'll go over some basics here. Assess controls in place. That doesn't just mean environmental controls. That means any type of engineering control, administrative, among other things that we see associated with the supply chain. Of course, if they have a significant environmental impact, that's an area of focus that we'll take into consideration. Also take a look at possibilities in your emergency management planning. If you have foreseeable emergency situations, obviously we need to address compliance and consideration within your company structure, whether you want to look beyond, whether that's sustainability or some other approach that you've decided as an important focus area. One of the key things, though, I will mention to you that ISO tells you to take into consideration is only focus on things you have control over. Obviously, you have to weigh that out, and that's where we'll talk a little bit about risk, and that's where that all ties together with your aspects and impacts. One thing I would encourage you to do, not only with the change in the ISO standard, but on a regular basis, update your aspects and impacts with any change that you make in your organization. That could be whether it's planned or new developments, you're expanding a business line, you're expanding a product, maybe it's a new or modified activity, it's something simple within your facility. And then we talked about products and services. So anytime you have a change, it's something you should step back and take into consideration. Maybe it's focused on that change, maybe it's a more global change, maybe it's aligned with a budgeting cycle. But again, I would encourage you to continue to consider your aspects and impacts. Emily already touched upon, a matrix where we talk about and rank aspects and impacts. As we talked about earlier, there's an important aspect in order to look at all elements of the business. When you're evaluating this, take a look at that from a risk perspective and a prioritization perspective. We'll get a little bit more into that as we talk about risk evaluation. So let's stop and talk about risk for a second, and ask. But maybe you've already quantified your aspects. You've considered your significant impacts associated with your aspects. At that point, that's when you've prioritized. That's when you begin to start to define your approach around those prioritized aspects, justifying resources, Risk evaluation can also help you uncover the unknowns around those significant aspects and impacts. And ideally, it will help you promote innovation. And we'll talk a little bit about that in other ways in order to continually improve your organization. So let's start with what ISO actually recommends with risk management. First, they ask you to quantify your risks for desired outcome, prevent or reduce desired effects, and achieve continual improvement. It's really consistent with the framework of what we would think of with an EMS. So, I mean, ISO actually provides you the basics. They also encourage you to look at the other aspects. And some of the considerations, whether you're a large or small organization, that you may want to look at are obviously compliance obligations, but the effect of a damaged reputation if you do have compliance issues or enforcement issues. Consideration beyond compliance. What is the cost associated with that? What are the expectations of interested parties? Like Emily talked about, she talked about stakeholders and what are their interests and focuses. What are they on you as your organization? So look at that. Maybe it's literacy or language barriers. Maybe within your organization, it's somewhat multilingual and it's very diverse. That's something that needs to be taken into consideration. You know, and following procedures, et cetera, and management of change. And we'll talk a little bit more about management of change later. Economic constraints, right? Economics are always something that have to be taken into consideration. Potential emergency situations, we talked about that. And the nature of your process and the hazards handled. You know, a chemical company is going to maybe go through something more thoroughly than a packaging company. But, you know, there are risks associated with both of those that consider more attention versus the other. But it really has to do with what impacts does it have to your organization and how critical is it to your business. Maybe if you're a multinational company or you are distributing your product internationally, in today's world economy, we also have to take a look at risks at a global scale. We have to look at what could potentially turn into an economic risk for your company, whether it be environmental impact, whether it be geopolitical, with everything in the news today. It could be societal, as society changes and shifts, and it could be technology, right? Those opportunities that each of us have individually with technology within our companies also creates a changing environment continually that we have to take into consideration within our management systems. It may enhance our management systems, but it's a risk that we also have to evaluate and determine if that's something that needs to be invested in. And then global awareness. There's a significant pressure on transparency. Things like the World Economic Forum, right? The Global Emerging Risk Survey that's posted annually, and global reporting initiatives. These are all elements that companies are much more transparent than they were in the past, and these are risks that all need to be taken into consideration, whether it's something that's a minor aspect or something that's a significant environmental aspect. So now that we talked a lot about risks and where they could come from, let's talk about how we should evaluate them. So basically, as we talked about, you evaluate your risk based on the complexity of your issues. So key elements that we need to step back and take into consideration are assigning this responsibility and accountability for the risk, right? And who's in charge and who's going to follow through? Successful risk evaluation also involves conducting adequate research and knowing the background. It could include consulting with subject matter experts and benchmarking. Finding out how other people are dealing with this problem is critical in the success of implementation and solving that problem. And of course, summarizing and reporting it in front of upper management, helping to define those risks, and then how you're going to mitigate and or prevent the future risks. So I think most of you are pretty familiar with the standard risk management tools, like a risk matrix, where you take a number of considerations with frequency and the level of risk, and you could rank them. You can do this in for a number of elements, whether it be in all of your aspects, whether it be an individual significant aspect or impact, and taking into consideration the consequences, whether it's people, assets, the environment, or your reputation. And it really, this exercise really helps you identify what risks are tolerable and what risks really need attention, your focus, and your resources. One thing I would encourage you is, if you are evaluating risk, step back and look at this from a collaborative opportunity. Again, this is where innovation comes to play and where you can empower people in order to come up with new ideas and new approaches. Some of the other tools that we at Trinity have helped implement with clients in evaluating risk include maybe a fishbone analysis or a failure modes and effect analysis. Maybe it's a fence diagram, something very simple, but again, it helps rank things, and it's a collaborative environment. I had a CEO actually mention to me, risks are not about what we know and what we're managing and the current challenges we have in front of us. It's more about the unknowns and what we have not identified to date. With that collaborative environment and from multiple areas within the company, multiple departments, maybe if you have outside expertise, maybe it's someone like Trinity who's also seen a lot of different things from a lot of different companies. Information like that can really enhance your awareness and be able to define and evaluate that risk, and really turn a risk management process from risk mitigation, ideally, to risk prevention. So kind of in summary, where we've gone so far and where I'd like to take you with risk is, we've talked about risk analysis and prioritizing things. We talked about risk evaluation. We didn't get real deep, but we talked about the benefits of it and maybe some of the approaches that you might consider. What I'd like to do is move on to risk mitigation and prevention. And of course, as I encouraged you with your aspects and impacts, I think it's extremely important to continue to evaluate your risk and your approach as the elements of your process change. Also, your game plan may also have to change, and that's something to take into consideration and continue to evaluate. So let's talk about mitigation or prevention of risk. So basically, in order to improve risk management, consideration of management of change is a significant step in that process. Every good management system that I've observed has had a robust change management procedure. Really, it is a critical piece in order to continue to promote and prevent and or mitigate your continuous improvement cycle. You know, as humans, we all go through a change. When a change occurs, there's a change curve that we naturally go through. You know, everything from denial all the way progressively through acceptance. Well, your organizations go through that as well. And that needs to be acknowledged in your management and change procedure. And I cannot stress enough how much collaboration, continual meeting, communication, and awareness are so critical to your management and change procedure. That continual follow-up, as painful as it may be sometimes, may actually help prevent that future risk, and depending on how critical and how much impact will occur to your company. So with that, we already talked about reevaluating your risk and the approach. Again, that's something as the progressive steps through risk management we need to take into consideration to continue to steer that bus so that we're heading down the right direction and solving any challenges we have, environmental aspects or impacts, in the most effective and efficient manner and in line with the rest of our company. So from here, let's move on to a life cycle perspective. As Emily mentioned, this is a new element prescribed by ISO. Most people kind of have concerns about it. Is it too much? Is it too little? I'm going to show you a little bit about why people are conducting life cycle analysis, who's doing them, and we'll talk a little bit about standard tools. Before we get into that, though, what I'd like to describe to you is what ISO really requires. So with the new standard that was published in 2015, it really provides a succinct definition of life cycle assessment. And that is, it's the perspective for assessing environmental aspects. It's really back to that foundation that we originally talked about with aspects and impacts and defining the context of your organization. So you're compiling an inventory of relative inputs and outputs. You evaluate the environmental impacts and you interpret those results. Again, that's a form of a risk analysis, maybe to a lesser extent. But one of the things nice about ISO is it allows you to define how much effort you put into these processes and really what's advantageous for you and your company. This is a simple aspects and impact scorecard that we developed for a company that did not want to go very far with a life cycle analysis. Maybe if you are interested in a life cycle analysis, though, you go further and take advantage of this. Like we have Walmart that's trying to implement an environmental product declaration. Much like the labels on your food, they're trying to promote that with all their suppliers as well. At that point, maybe it's advantageous for your company, depending on who you're supplying and where your products are used, that you go through an entire life cycle analysis. I won't spend a lot of time here, but I do want to give you some highlights of things that you need to look at. We talked a little bit about this already in identifying your aspects and impacts across your entire supply chain. So really it's from start to finish, right? Extraction and processing of raw materials right down to recycling and disposal. So what are some of the applications and why would you conduct an LCA? We talked about production process impact and there is opportunities for optimization, supply chain engagement and management of your stakeholders, maybe within your supply chain, waste management, product packaging and development, green marketing, as I mentioned earlier, risk management, and possibly their sustainability goals within your organization. Some of the benefits that we've seen that people have promoted is they feel it'll help them make better products. It puts sustainability on a scientific footing. And even some people believe that there is opportunities to increase revenues. So there's many opportunities that you can take advantage of with life cycle thinking, depending on the focus of your organization and the products you make. So some of the results that come out of a life cycle assessment include comparison by weight of maybe the function of your product. This is an example of brick and mortar and vinyl siding. Consideration of some of the elements of usage of water intake, indoor air quality, potential cancer impacts and health impacts, fossil fuel depletion, and acidification, just to name a few of the elements that they took into consideration. So another thing to look at is maybe your energy consumption. And this is an opportunity to optimize your process. If you are measuring, maybe in this case they measured manufacturing energy, the phase of energy, as well as transport energy coming in multiple facets and forms. So it is something that many people use. And the tools are numerous. This is the output of the tools. But I think what we'll continue moving forward with sustainability and social responsibility in the interest of time. So much like a lot of the theme that I've discussed so far is really sustainability and social responsibility have to be interwoven throughout your EMS. In order to optimize it, things go hand in hand with continuous improvement and sustainability. Much like your EMS, you have an opportunity to enhance your company's image, keep stakeholders informed, and as you saw earlier in our presentation, ISO actually encourages it within its mission statement to support and promote sustainability. So opportunities with the integration of sustainability within your EMS include employee engagement. We talked a lot already about stakeholder relations, operating facilities, and basically bring it down to the level of the operating facility, as well as on a corporate-wide basis, and then defining sustainability metrics and incorporating your aspects and impacts with that. Some examples of sustainability metrics that we see a lot of people implementing. We talked about this notion of transparency, and there's a number of decisions behind that in what individually your company feels is important, whether it be to stakeholder outreach, and also taking a look at internally promoting your own product and your own strategic objectives with your employees. Energy and climate, product stewardship also ties back into your supply chain. And we talked about the environmental elements, including waste management and water conservation, as well as safety. One thing about sustainability, and we'll touch upon social responsibility, is that if the people in your organization, if the people that are on the manufacturing floor, or they're teaching a subject, or whatever their role is, if they're speaking sustainability, you know that your company is promoting sustainability adequately. Because if they believe in it, it will show, and it'll show through the entire corporation. So what a better way to take advantage of that by incorporating it into your EMS. Some of the things that we've seen that have made it made sustainability successful when integrating with your EMS. First, take a systematic approach, right? Evaluate the logic and structure of the EMS and how each element fits in. Customize it. Learn to drive improvement, right? That's kind of an obvious statement within an EMS, but it's a critical statement. Optimize how your senior and line managers promote that message. Integrate risk management and behavior optimization, as we discussed, and that's kind of overlap with some of your safety systems maybe as well. It's critical to align staff, in the example I talked about. It's also critical to act consistent with trust and integrity, treating others with dignity and respect, and really promoting that personal concern for stakeholders. Understand the relationships between business, accountability, and communication. If you continue to promote that within your organization and it's interwoven with your EMS, it will help ensure success overall. So let's draw on our last topic, which is corporate social responsibility. Much like EMS, much like sustainability, this is becoming an important, critical piece of business in today's global environment and people's awareness that is so acute through social media and all forms of media today. It's no accident, I should say, that the first 4 bullets there start with the word define. Really successful social responsibility for an organization, you need to define what your mission is, and how you're going to approach the public, right? Is it going to be a passive approach or consultative? Is it going to be external? How's that external approach look? You need to consider who you're going to empower and find external cheerleaders for you as well. Also, kind of as an overarching theme, make sure that you're defining people, the planet, and of course your profits. One thing to consider to help you promote social responsibility is find a partner, a foundation, or a cause that may be important to you, your company's strategic mission, as well as local interests and stakeholder groups. So really, successful social responsibility starts with progressive and well thought out reporting, frequent communication, mean what you say, and prepare for resolution of issues. This is a critical piece that should be defined already in your EMS, but it also is a critical piece in dealing with the public. And then, of course, include public consultation early in the decision-making process. All right, with that, I want to summarize a few things that we've talked about. We talked about a lot of elements within your EMS, some critical elements within your EMS. One thing I would say is successful implementation. It's really essential to actively engage. Much like Emily said, it's a continual process. It's a living, breathing organism in a sense, right? So ask yourself, have you identified and integrated into your decision-making, the entire corporation's decision-making, whether it's society impacts, the viability of your company, your management system, costs, life cycle analysis, technical feasibility. So one of the things that we've seen in successful implementation include really our support with some of the following elements. And how we've taken a look at this in that active engagement that I've talked to you about, whether you're aligning with the standard, you're creating a new EMS, whether you're doing a gap analysis, what have you, is really it's Trinity's action-oriented approach, our accountability, credibility, and integrity. We take a systematic focus, which I think most of you who have implemented EMSs or been in charge of that know how critical that is. We talked a lot today about integration with your business strategy, and then understand how it influences your culture. Emily talked a lot about context of the organization. The new ISO standard talks a lot about leadership and their commitment. That's a significant piece to the whole thing. So some elements that I'd like you to consider is, we talked a lot about, yes, Trinity can help you with a lot of different things. Here's some of a detailed list of some of the things that we offer to clients. Everything from development to gap analysis, developing policies, whether it be training or life cycle analysis, and then of course some of the sustainability data collection and management. One of the things we pride ourselves on, similar to this webinar, is professional education offerings. And I'm going to turn it over to Cassandra right now in order to wrap things up to address any questions. And she'll also talk about some of our education and the survey that will follow this webinar. Cassandra, can I turn it over to you?
Yes. Let me. Okay. Hello, my name is Cassandra, and I'm a technical assistant at Trinity Consultants, and I'm going to briefly touch on some of the opportunities Trinity has to offer. So we have over 200 standard EHS regulatory courses and EHS management system courses on a range of EMS topics and auditing. So Trinity's upcoming EMS courses, we have 2 courses we are offering. One is Environmental Management System Webinar, which will be online on October 18th. And we also have an Implementing a Best-in-Class ISO 14001-2015 EMS course, and that's in Phoenix, Arizona on December 7th, 2016. And if you're interested in attending either of these courses, please feel free to contact me. All of you should have my email, so you can just send me an email and I can get you more information. And Trinity also publishes monthly regulatory newsletters and an environmental quarterly. If you would like to receive either of these and are not, just let me know. This discusses our free seminars and webinars, online registration, and also goes through federal and state regulatory updates. Okay. And please connect with Trinity. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So I see that there are some questions being asked. Brian and Emily, do you have time to answer questions? Sure. Okay, so just feel free to take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. So I think the one question that we received from an attendee was, is there a deadline by which a company currently certified to ISO 14001-2004 standard needs to implement ISO 14000-2015 requirements to ensure continuous certification? This is a really good question. So in terms of timing on updating to the 2015 standard, the standard was published in September of 2015, and the official transition period is 3 years. So the ISO 14001-2004 standard will be completely retired by September of 2018. But the actual transition period is a little bit more up to the discretion of registrars that are certifying the systems. And at this point, it's looking like that is going to be more of a 2-year period to certify your system to the 2015 standard. And at that point, the 2004 standard will no longer be valid. So of course, you can still get certified to the 2004 standard in the next 2 years, but that would logistically not be too useful for your organization. So companies are seeking realignment with the 2015 standard during their next recertification audit, which occurs every 3 years. And I believe that was our only question. Is that correct, Cassandra?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, if any other questions come up after this presentation, please feel free to contact either me, Emily McKeon, or Brian Mensinger. You have our emails and phone numbers from this presentation. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.